the moment before emotion forms. Consider this carefully before anything else. What you call emotion is not the beginning of disturbance. It is the result. Before anger, before anxiety, before the tightening in the chest, something quieter occurs. A thought appears. It presents itself as obvious, urgent, and true. Most people do not notice this stage. They feel the emotion and assume the cause lies outside them. Stoic discipline begins by refusing that assumption. Events arrive without meaning. A message is delayed. A comment is made. A plan fails. None of these carries disturbance within it. The disturbance arises only when the mind adds a judgment: this is bad, this is unfair, this should not be happening. That addition is not forced. It is supplied. This is where responsibility lies. To say this is not to deny feeling. It is to locate its source. If you believe events themselves produce emotion, you surrender authority immediately. You wait for the world to behave before you can be calm. Stoicism does not offer that comfort. It offers clarity. You are not asked to suppress emotion or pretend indifference. You are asked to see the sequence honestly. Impression comes first. Judgment follows. Emotion obeys that judgment. Change does not begin by managing feelings. It begins by examining what the mind agrees to. Responsibility cannot be outsourced to circumstances, other people, or the past. If disturbance is created by judgment, then judgment is where discipline must be applied. Hold this distinction, the boundary where authority ends. Before discussing discipline, ownership must be precise. Most disturbance persists because the mind claims authority where none exists. It reaches outward and treats events, outcomes, and other people as if they were possessions. When they fail to obey, frustration follows. This frustration is not accidental. It is the direct result of misassigned responsibility. Stoic discipline begins with a hard boundary. Some things belong to you completely. Others do not belong to you at all. There is no middle category. Your judgments are yours. Your intentions are yours. Your choices, refusals, and inner responses are yours. They answer to reason alone. No one can enter that space without your consent. Everything else stands outside that boundary. The behavior of other people does not belong to you. Their opinions do not belong to you. Outcomes do not belong to you. Reputation, timing, recognition, and chance do not belong to you. Even the body, which feels intimate and personal, does not obey you absolutely. To treat these as possessions is to guarantee conflict. Notice how easily the mind blurs this line. A message goes unanswered, and the mind claims the response time of another person as its right. A plan fails, and the mind treats success as something owed. A criticism appears, and the mind assumes control over how it should be received by others. In each case, the effort is misplaced. Energy is spent attempting to govern what is not subject to command. This confusion is not harmless. It creates a constant sense of resistance. The world feels obstructive. Other people feel like problems. Circumstances appear hostile. Yet none of this originates in the world itself. It originates in the assumption of false ownership. When authority is misidentified, discipline cannot function. People often say they want more control. What they usually mean is control over outcomes. Stoicism offers no such promise. It offers something narrower and more demanding: absolute responsibility for what is actually yours. That responsibility cannot be shared, delegated, or avoided. Consider a simple example. You prepare carefully for a conversation. You choose your words with restraint. You speak calmly. The other person reacts defensively. At this point, disturbance arises only if you treat their reaction as evidence of failure. But their reaction was never yours to command. What belonged to you was preparation, tone, and intention. Once those are exercised, your responsibility is complete. Or consider delay. You arrive on time. Others do not. Irritation appears. The irritation is not caused by waiting. It is caused by the belief that punctuality from others is something you are entitled to control. Remove that belief, and waiting remains, but disturbance dissolves. This distinction does not excuse passivity. It sharpens effort. When you stop trying to manage what does not belong to you, attention returns inward. Energy becomes usable. Discipline becomes possible. You no longer negotiate with reality. You respond to it. This is why Stoic freedom is inseparable from limits. Freedom does not come from expanding control. It comes from contracting it to what is truly yours. Within that domain, authority is complete. Outside it, acceptance is required. Many resist this boundary because it feels like loss. In truth, it is recovery. You recover time wasted on resentment. You recover clarity lost to expectation. You recover responsibility that had been scattered across circumstances. This boundary does not remove difficulty from life. It removes confusion. And confusion is what multiplies difficulty unnecessarily. Once this distinction is held steadily, effort stops leaking outward. Discipline gains a stable foundation. The work becomes internal, where it has always belonged. This explains where effort is misplaced, but not yet how disturbance takes hold, the point where the mind agrees. Now we look at what actually creates disturbance. Between an event and an emotion, there is a mechanism the mind prefers to ignore. Something happens. An impression appears. This impression is immediate. It is automatic. It carries a suggestion: this is good, this is bad, this is dangerous, this matters. The suggestion arrives without asking permission. This is not yet disturbance. An impression is only a presentation. It has no authority on its own. Stoic discipline begins by recognizing this clearly. You are not responsible for the arrival of impressions. You are responsible for what happens next. What happens next is assent. Assent is the moment the mind agrees with the impression. It says yes, this is as it appears. Yes, this judgment is true. Yes, this deserves reaction. That agreement is quiet and fast. It is often unnoticed. But it is the decisive act. Impressions arrive uninvited. Assent does not. Most people collapse these two stages into one. They say, I was angry because he insulted me, or I felt anxious because the situation was uncertain. This language hides the mechanism. The insult was an impression. The uncertainty was an impression. Anger and anxiety followed only after the mind agreed with the judgment attached to them. Notice the sequence carefully. A comment is made. The impression says, this is disrespectful. The mind assents. Anger follows. A message is delayed. The impression says, this is a problem. The mind assents. Anxiety follows. A plan changes. The impression says, this should not be happening. The mind assents. Frustration follows. In every case, the emotion is downstream. It obeys the judgment that was accepted. This does not mean you choose emotions directly. It means emotions reflect what the mind has already decided. That decision is often habitual. It is shaped by repetition. But habit does not remove responsibility. It only explains why the process feels automatic. The point of freedom is narrow but absolute. Between impression and assent, there is a pause. It may be brief. It may feel almost theoretical at first. But it exists. In that pause, the mind can ask a single question: is this judgment necessary? Not comforting. Not pleasant. Necessary. You are not asked to argue with impressions endlessly. You are asked to withhold agreement until reason is satisfied. This is why Stoic practice emphasizes delay. Not delay of action, but delay of judgment. Consider criticism. The impression says, this threatens my standing. If the mind assents, defensiveness appears immediately. If assent is withheld, the impression remains just that, a sound, a statement, a perception. You may still respond. You may correct, clarify, or disengage. But the response is chosen, not compelled. Or consider inconvenience. The impression says, "This ruins the day." Assent produces irritation. Without assent, inconvenience remains a fact, not a verdict. The body adjusts. The mind stays intact. This distinction is subtle. It is also unforgiving. There is no external signal marking the moment of assent. No warning appears. That is why discipline must be trained before pressure arrives. Many people believe freedom lies in changing situations. Stoicism locates it elsewhere. Freedom lies in the capacity to say, "This impression has not yet earned my agreement." That capacity is not emotional. It is rational. Do not confuse this with suppression. Suppression tries to block feeling after assent has already occurred. Discipline works earlier. It prevents unnecessary assent from taking place. Once assent is given, emotion follows naturally. At that point, the work is already harder. The Stoic does not wait there. The Stoic works at the origin. Understanding this mechanism is clarifying. It is not sufficient. Understanding the mechanism is not enough. It must be trained, discipline as the training of attention. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They imagine discipline as force, as endurance, as pushing against the mind until it submits. In that model, success means suppression, and failure means weakness. Stoic discipline rejects this entirely. It does not rely on force because force is unreliable. It works only while pressure is present. Discipline, in the Stoic sense, is training. Training is quiet. It is repetitive. It does not wait for strong emotion to appear. It prepares the mind before difficulty arrives. The aim is not to overpower impressions, but to recognize them accurately and respond with consistency. This distinction matters. Force reacts after the impression has already taken control. Training operates earlier. It shapes how the mind meets impressions in the first place. When attention is trained, the pause before assent becomes stable. It is no longer an emergency measure. It becomes the default. Many people believe discipline means eliminating emotion. This is another error. Stoic discipline does not remove feeling. It removes confusion. Emotions still arise, but they are proportionate. They no longer escalate unnecessarily because judgment is no longer careless. Consider what actually requires training. Not willpower. Willpower is unreliable and finite. It exhausts itself quickly. What must be trained is attention, the ability to notice impressions as impressions, not as commands. Attention determines whether the mind automatically agrees or briefly observes. This is why Stoic texts emphasize practice over insight. Understanding that assent is optional does not make it optional in practice. The habit of assent has been reinforced for years. It will not dissolve through explanation. It dissolves through repetition of restraint. Training begins small. You notice a minor irritation. Not a crisis. Not a major insult. Something ordinary. A delay. A noise. A small inconvenience. This is where training belongs. If the mind cannot pause here, it will not pause under pressure. At first, the pause feels artificial. You remember the distinction after the emotion has already appeared. That is normal. Discipline does not demand immediate success. It demands consistent return. Each time you notice, even late, the training continues. Gradually, the interval between impression and assent becomes more visible. The mind starts to recognize the familiar judgments as they form. This is not mystical. It is mechanical. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates space. Discipline fails when it is treated as punishment. Some attempt to correct themselves through self-criticism. They feel irritation and respond with blame, I should be better than this. That judgment simply adds another layer of disturbance. It trains nothing. It reinforces urgency and aversion. Stoic training is neutral. You observe the impression. You notice whether assent occurred. You adjust next time. No praise. No guilt. Both are distractions. Both shift attention away from the mechanism itself. The goal is not perfection. The goal is reliability. A trained mind does not need dramatic effort to pause. It does not argue endlessly with itself. It recognizes impressions, measures them, and either assents or withholds assent without ceremony. This is why discipline feels unimpressive from the outside. There is no visible struggle. No internal monologue of resistance. The work is mostly invisible because it occurs before reaction. What appears outwardly as calm is simply the absence of unnecessary agreement. Training also clarifies responsibility. When you stop expecting discipline to feel heroic, you stop postponing it. You practice where you are, with what appears, without waiting for motivation. Discipline becomes procedural rather than emotional. This is not a personality trait. It is a skill. Like any skill, it weakens without use and strengthens with application. There is no final mastery. There is maintenance. Each impression presents the same choice, regardless of how long you have practiced. This is why Stoic discipline is sustainable. It does not depend on mood. It depends on structure. When attention is trained, effort becomes precise. You no longer waste energy fighting outcomes. You apply it at the only point that matters. Training remains abstract unless it appears in daily life, where practice enters the ordinary day. This practice is proven in ordinary moments. Stoic discipline does not announce itself during crisis. It reveals itself in what you usually dismiss as insignificant. Minor frustrations, routine interactions, small deviations from expectation. This is where training either exists or it does not. Practice fails when it is reserved for dramatic situations. The mind rehearses its habits daily. If it practices careless assent all day, it will not suddenly become disciplined under pressure. That is why Stoicism insists on daily operation, not occasional correction. There are 3 practices that stabilize discipline without strain. The first is anticipating impressions accurately. This is not pessimism. It is precision. You expect interruption, delay, misunderstanding, and inconvenience because these are common features of life. Expecting them does not mean resenting them in advance. It means removing surprise. Surprise is what accelerates assent. When the mind assumes smooth passage and reality interrupts, the impression arrives with force. This should not be happening. That judgment is unnecessary. When interruption is expected, the impression loses urgency. It becomes familiar. Familiar impressions are easier to observe without agreement. You are not rehearsing discomfort. You are rehearsing clarity. The second practice is pausing before assent. This pause does not require ceremony. One breath is enough. Not to calm emotion, but to delay agreement. The breath creates a gap. In that gap, the mind can ask whether the judgment presented by the impression is required. Often, it is not. A delay is just a delay. A comment is just a sound. A mistake is just an event. Without assent, they remain what they are. With assent, they become verdicts. This pause will feel fragile at first. That is expected. The habit of immediate agreement has been reinforced for years. Do not demand consistency immediately. Demand return. Each time you remember to pause, even after the fact, the training continues. The third practice is evening review. At the end of the day, you revisit impressions without judgment. Not to praise success. Not to punish failure. You simply notice where assent was given too quickly and where it was withheld. Guilt has no role here. Guilt is just another unexamined judgment. It says, "This failure means something about me." That judgment distracts from the mechanism itself. The review is technical, not moral. You note patterns. Certain impressions trigger faster assent. Certain situations produce the same reactions. This information is useful. It directs future attention. Nothing else is required. These practices are quiet. They do not feel transformative. That is their strength. They integrate discipline into routine rather than isolating it as a special effort. Over time, the mind begins to expect impressions rather than react to them. The pause becomes habitual. Assent becomes selective. Life does not become smoother. Your relationship to it becomes steadier. This steadiness is not indifference. It is readiness. You respond without haste. You act without internal resistance. The mind stays aligned with what belongs to it. Practice does not eliminate difficulty. It prevents multiplication. When these practices are maintained, something subtle changes. You stop chasing relief through control of outcomes. You stop demanding that the day cooperate before you can be composed. Consistency produces a different result. What freedom remains untouched? Freedom is often misunderstood. Most people imagine freedom as ease, as the absence of obstacles, as life arranging itself conveniently. Stoic discipline does not promise this. It does not attempt to reorganize the world so that you can remain calm. It asks something stricter, that you locate freedom where interference cannot reach. That location is internal. Freedom, in the Stoic sense, is the condition of having authority over your own judgment. It is not comfort. Comfort depends on circumstances. Circumstances shift without notice. A freedom that relies on them is fragile by design. Life does not become easier through Stoic practice. That expectation must be removed immediately. Difficulty remains. Uncertainty remains. Loss, delay, and misunderstanding remain. What changes is where command is exercised. When judgment is trained, authority returns inward. You no longer wait for outcomes to determine your state. You no longer negotiate with events in hopes of relief. You meet what appears and decide, deliberately, how much agreement it deserves. That decision is not emotional. It is rational. And it is yours. This is why Stoic freedom is stable. Nothing outside you must improve for it to operate. Other people may behave poorly. Plans may fail. The body may weaken. None of this prevents you from maintaining judgment. None of it forces assent. None of it removes responsibility. This freedom is quiet. There is no sense of victory attached to it. No feeling of being above circumstances. Those reactions would only be new judgments seeking satisfaction. Stoic freedom is simply the absence of compulsion. You are no longer pushed into reaction by impressions you have not examined. Consider what cannot be taken from you. Your capacity to pause remains. Your capacity to withhold assent remains. Your capacity to respond according to reason remains. Even under pressure, these remain available. They may be harder to access. They may require training. But they are never removed by force. This is why Stoicism places such emphasis on maintenance. Freedom is not achieved once and then secured. It is maintained impression by impression. Each day offers the same test. Each impression asks the same question: will you agree automatically, or will you examine first? There is no finish line here. Some imagine that practice leads to a permanent state of calm. This expectation undermines discipline. Calm fluctuates. Emotions fluctuate. What does not need to fluctuate is responsibility. You can lose composure without losing authority, as long as you return to judgment rather than blaming circumstance. This distinction matters. If freedom is defined as feeling good, it will disappear regularly. If freedom is defined as choosing deliberately, It remains intact even when feeling is unsettled. Stoic discipline chooses the second definition. Nothing about this is dramatic. It does not produce visible markers of success. Others may not notice it at all. That is appropriate. Freedom is not a performance. It is a condition of alignment between reason and response. When authority is placed correctly, resentment fades without effort. Not because others improve, but because expectation has been withdrawn. You stop asking the world to cooperate with your preferences. You stop treating disturbance as something imposed on you. This does not make you passive. Action continues. Decisions are made. Boundaries are set. But action is no longer entangled with the demand that it guarantee emotional outcomes. You act because it is reasonable to act, not because it promises relief. This is the kind of freedom Stoicism protects. It cannot be granted by others. It cannot be revoked by events. It cannot be secured once and forgotten. It must be exercised repeatedly, without drama, without complaint. When practiced consistently, it produces a form of stability that does not depend on luck. Nothing more needs to be added, the responsibility that cannot be given away. This ends where responsibility begins. Nothing described here requires intensity or escalation. It requires accuracy. The core Stoic claim is simple and demanding: disturbance does not come from events, but from the judgments you supply to them. If that is true, then responsibility cannot be transferred elsewhere without distortion. You may explain your reactions, but you cannot excuse them by appeal to circumstance. Impressions will continue to arrive. Some will be sharp. Some will be familiar. Some will arrive when you are tired or distracted. None of this removes responsibility. It only clarifies where practice is required. Stoic discipline does not ask for perfection. It asks for return. You will assent too quickly at times. You will notice late. You will react before remembering the distinction. This does not invalidate the practice. It confirms that the practice is necessary. The work resumes at the moment you remember where authority actually lies. There is no advantage in dramatizing this. Responsibility is not a burden added to life. It is the removal of false claims. When you stop insisting that others, outcomes, or conditions must change before you can be steady, effort becomes simpler. You return to judgment. You return to choice. You return to what is yours. This is not resignation. Action remains. Boundaries remain. Decisions remain. What disappears is the belief that peace must be granted from outside. That belief is the source of repeated disturbance. The Stoic position is unambiguous. If judgment creates disturbance, then judgment is where freedom is exercised. No one else can do this work for you. No condition can relieve you of it. The work is simple. It is not easy. And it is yours. Return to what is yours.